Wild Soul HOPECast, Episode 4. P. Positive. Grief is not a detour. Loving through addiction without losing yourself. Sponsored by The Hope Method by Sharon Lee. Available on multiple platforms. Hi, lovies. Welcome back to Wild Soul HOPECast. I'm Sharon Lee, creator of Wild Soul Hope, The Hope Method, and author of When the Soul Remembers Hope. I turn chaos into clarity using hope and unconditional love, while we uncover the lie about hope to pivot survival into sovereignty. Today's episode isn't about finding someone. It's about not losing yourself to grief and or addiction. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found your way in. And if you're returning, thank you for being here again. This matters more than you know. Before we begin, let's step into presence, not in a performative way, not a take 3 deep breaths and fix yourself way, just a real pause with a big breath in, hold it, 2, 3, 4, and exhale. Not to fix anything, not to become anything, just to arrive. Let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw. Notice where your body is holding today. If you're listening while driving or folding laundry or sitting quietly with a cup of tea, let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. If you're listening while caring for someone you love, or if you're exhausted from holding hope for another human, this episode is for you. Today we're talking about positivity, but not the kind that tells you to smile through pain or just stay hopeful. We're talking about authentic positivity, the kind that can sit with addiction, fear, uncertainty, and grief, and still choose love without collapse. Grief has a way of tightening us without asking permission. So if you're holding your breath today, this is your reminder to exhale. You don't need to brace yourself here. You're safe to feel whatever shows up. There will be no graphic details here, only truth, dignity, and steadiness. Let's begin. In the Hope Method, positive is often the most misunderstood principle, because most of us were taught that positivity means looking on the bright side, staying upbeat, being grateful no matter what, faking it until we make it, believing everything will work out. But trauma knows better than that. Yeah, authentic positivity does not ask you to lie to your nervous system. It doesn't ask you to bypass reality, and it certainly doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. In hope, positive is not an emotion. It is an orientation. It means choosing life without denial, staying present instead of disappearing, supporting reality rather than fighting it, holding love and boundaries at the same time. And this is where I want to anchor us with a truth from the Hope Method. One of the core truths I share in the Hope Method is this: hope that requires denial is not hope. It's disassociation dressed up as faith. In hope, positivity means life-affirming. It means oriented towards growth, repair, and truth. Positive does not mean things are good. It means you're still choosing life. It looks like staying present instead of disappearing, choosing the least harmful next step, supporting reality rather than fighting it, holding love and boundaries at the same time. That's the kind of positivity we're talking about today. I have spent most of my life with the mindset that everything will work out the way it is meant to. I tried to grasp the lesson in the moment and process the fallout, generally striving toward do better, be better. By the time I was 21 years old, I had already lived through what most adults could not even imagine. This provided me with a particular perspective, where I would often tell myself, it wasn't as bad as my childhood. I'm safe now. No one is injured. It's just life. Nobody died. But then someone did die. My own child. So today, I want to share my thoughts about grief, not as something to fix, not as something to get through or get over, not as a problem on the way to happiness, but as something that walks with us. Because grief gutted me, sidelined me, stole my joy, and I had to rebuild myself from darkness while still trying to raise two small children that needed my love and attention while being able to keep a marriage intact. Somewhere along the way, grief was framed as a detour, a disruption, a delay, a sign that life has gone off course. But grief doesn't mean you've taken the wrong turn. Grief means you loved. And you love so deeply that that love has the ability to reshape your entire persona and life journey. I mean, let's face it, love always leaves an imprint. If it didn't, we would have no shadow or lessons we need to experience. But let's not get too off track with that, okay? I will make sure to cover those topics as we go along through this podcast. Before we go too much further, I want to ground us because this topic lives in the body. By now, you should be feeling my words in your stomach, your true memory bank. So take a minute, grab a drink of water, state out loud before you drink, settle my nerves, ground my purpose. Then drink as much of that water as you can manage. Next, and if you're able, place one hand on your chest over your heart and one on your belly. Notice, is your breathing shallow or full? Are you bracing? Is there urgency in your body? Just notice, no fixing. With a big breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold it. 2, 3, 4, and exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Do that once more. Big breath in. 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This isn't a technique. It's a reminder to let your body catch up with your heart. This is important because addiction, whether you're living it or loving someone through it, is a nervous system experience before it is a behavioral one. And positivity that doesn't include regulation will always fall flat. Grief is not just about death. It's about the loss of a person, the loss of a future you imagine, the loss of a version of yourself, the loss of safety, the loss of certainty. Sometimes we grieve things we never even got to hold, and that kind of grief can be especially confusing because it doesn't always have a clear ending point. Grief doesn't move in a straight line. It doesn't obey timelines. It doesn't care how well you're functioning. It shows up in waves, in quiet moments, in laughter that suddenly turns into tears, in ordinary days that feel heavier than expected. And none of that means you're doing it wrong. No, it means your heart remembers the love that you hold deep within your soul. I want to share part of my story today, not to offer a formula, but to offer context. After reading When the Soul Remembers Hope, parents often ask me, how did you do it? How did you love your child without enabling? How did you stay hopeful without losing yourself? Here's the truth that I want to share carefully and respectfully. This story is shared with consent, without names or details, and with deep care. Here's the truth from my perspective. What changed everything was when I stopped asking my child to be who I needed them to be and started supporting them for who they actually were in that moment. That didn't mean agreeing with destructive behavior. It meant meeting reality instead of arguing with it. I learned this. Healing didn't begin when they finally met my expectation. It began when they felt safe enough to meet themselves. With my unconditional love, they felt safe enough to stare the shame and disappointment for themselves square in the eyes and hold their own shadow without judgment, supporting them where they were in the moment, 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year at a time. It looked like emotional steadiness instead of panic, consistency instead of threats, safety instead of chaos, presence instead of lectures. One of the most positive choices we made was also one of the hardest. We reduced chaos, especially romantic chaos. This matters. I did not withdraw love. I withdrew access to harm. That meant keeping the romantic partner out of the picture, not as punishment, but as regulation. Because love does not compete well with chaos. Addiction thrives in dysregulation. Healing needs quiet, structure, and time. And then there were boundaries. This part matters so much. I didn't withdraw love because love should never be conditional. I withdrew access to harm. Unconditional love stayed constant. Boundaries provided the container. As I write in the Hope Method, unconditional love is not unlimited access. Boundaries are how love stays intact. Sobriety didn't come from control. It came from safety, repetition, trust, and time. And today my child has remained sober and attends their appointments for both the care provider and counseling, not because they were forced to be something else, but because they were supported long enough to become themselves without shame. We're still working towards a goal of self-sustainability, but there is no pressure to perform. Many of us were taught, directly or indirectly, that grief should be handled privately and quietly. Be strong, be grateful, be resilient, move on. But here's the truth. Unprocessed grief doesn't disappear. It settles. It lives in the body, in exhaustion, in irritability, in numbness, in burnout. Hope teaches us that energy doesn't vanish, it transforms. So when grief isn't allowed space, it often shows up as anxiety, chronic fatigue, emotional detachment, overworking, people-pleasing. Not because you're broken, no, but because your system is asking to be acknowledged. Grief doesn't need you to be strong. It needs you to be present. Before we go any further, I want to pause here because everything we're talking about lives in the body first, not in the mind. Addiction is not a moral failure. It's not a lack of willpower. It's a nervous system adaptation. When a system grows up without consistent safety, it learns to stay alert. And over time, that vigilance becomes exhausting. So the system looks like relief, not joy, not pleasure, relief. Substances don't begin as a desire to escape life. They begin as a way to survive it. Grief works the same way. Grief activates the brain's threat and attachment systems. That's why it settles in the chest, the stomach, the jaw. This is why positivity without regulation feels like pressure, like abandonment. And here's something most people don't know. The part of the brain responsible for logic and choice goes offline when the nervous system is overwhelmed. You cannot reason someone out of dysregulation. You cannot shame someone into healing. Safety always comes first. This is why what worked both at home and in the drug court that I worked at, it wasn't fear or control. It was predictability, structure, dignity, and time. Boundaries organize the nervous system. Consistency lowers anxiety. Safety allows choice to return. And this is why regulation matters for you too. You cannot regulate someone you are abandoning yourself for. For 8 years of my adult life, I worked directly with addiction as a drug court coordinator for the district court. I witnessed addiction from another angle through drug court and systems meant to correct, quote unquote, behavior and reparent individuals who just needed someone to care. What I saw changed me forever. Over and over again, I saw adults with adult consequences and child wounds, people labeled as resistant, defiant, or unmotivated, who had never been parented, protected, or regulated. Addiction was not the beginning of their story. It was the attempt to survive the middle. And as I say in When the Soul Remembers Hope, what looks like self-destruction is often a nervous system doing its best to stay alive. What helped the most in recovery wasn't shame or fear. It was structured with dignity, consistency, clear expectations, accountability without humiliation. In other words, reparenting, not coddling, not rescuing, not guiding. That same framework echoed what worked at home: stability, predictability, safety, and time. This is why authentic positivity isn't loud or performative. It's quiet. It's steady. It stays. Let's bring this into the HOPE method. HOPE, harness optimal positive energy, does not ask you to replace grief with positivity. It asks you to stop fighting what already exists. Optimal energy doesn't come from denial. It comes from truth. Sometimes the most positive thing you can say is, "This hurts." Sometimes the most healing thing you can do is sit beside your grief without trying to improve it. Harnessing grief means noticing what you reach for when it hurts. Distraction, overgiving, numbing, fixing, and gently choosing to reach for yourself instead. Hope reminds us grief carried with honesty becomes wisdom. Grief carried alone becomes weight, a heavy weight. This understanding isn't new. Long before psychology had language for the nervous system, ancient cultures were asked the same question: how do you love without losing yourself? Stoic philosophy taught presence without collapse, not pretending, not numbing, just right relationship with reality. Buddhism taught compassion without attachment, love without control, and indigenous wisdom understood addiction as soul loss, not moral failure. Healing was communal. Grief was witnessed. No one carried it alone. Which is why so many people today aren't failing at grief. Grief has simply been orphaned. As I write in When the Soul Remembers Hope, what looks like self-destruction is often a nervous system doing its best to stay alive. Authentic positivity has always been quiet, steady, truthful. It stays. The Stoics are often misunderstood. People think Stoicism means suppressing emotion or being cold, but that's not what it was at all. Stoicism was about meeting reality without collapse. They believed suffering didn't come from pain itself. It came from resisting what already is, arguing with reality, from demanding life be different before we allow ourselves to breathe. There's a concept in Stoicism called the love of fate, not approval, not celebration, but acceptance without self-betrayal. In other words, I see what is. I will respond with integrity. I will not abandon myself trying to control what I cannot. That is not passive. That is powerful. Stoics didn't teach blind optimism. They taught right relationship with truth. And that's exactly what we mean by positive in the Hope method. Positive does not mean pretending things are okay. It means staying in right relationship with reality without hardening your heart or collapsing your boundaries. Buddhism offers another essential layer, especially when it comes to addiction and grief. In Buddhist thought, suffering doesn't come from love. It comes from attachment to how things should be. That distinction matters. Attachment says, you need to be different so I can be okay. Compassion says, I see your suffering and I will not abandon myself trying to fix it. Buddhism teaches that clinging to outcomes, identities, timelines creates suffering for everyone involved. This is why love without boundaries becomes pain, and why boundaries without love becomes cruelty. True compassion lives in the middle. You stay present, you stay kind, and you let go of the illusion that you can control another person's awakening. This is soul-level positivity. Not hope as expectation, but hope as presence. Many indigenous cultures understood something modern systems forgot. Addiction was never viewed as a moral defect. It was understood as a soul loss. When someone became addicted, the question wasn't, what's wrong with them? It was, what happened to them? What was taken? What safety was lost? What belonging was broken? Healing wasn't solitary. It wasn't shame-based. It wasn't rushed. It was communal, ritualized, grounded in time and relationship. The grief wasn't hidden. It was honored. Grief had a place, a season, a witness, which is why so many modern people feel like they're failing at grief, when really, grief has just been orphaned. There's no village anymore, no container, no permission to rest, so grief turns inward. It becomes exhaustion, burnout, numbness, not because you're weak, but because you were never meant to carry this alone. Across all these traditions, Stoic, Buddhist, Indigenous, positivity was never about feeling good. It was about staying aligned with life. It meant responding instead of reacting, choosing integrity over illusion, honoring grief without letting it hollow you out, loving without disappearing. That's why I say this gently, but clearly. It doesn't perform. It doesn't rush grief. It doesn't demand outcomes. It doesn't require self-erasure. It stays. When we say HOPE stands for Harness Optimal Positive Energy, this is what we mean. Not energy that denies pain, but energy that supports life. Not hope as fantasy, but hope is orientation. Hope is not believing things will turn out a certain way. Hope is staying oriented toward life, even when you don't know how the story ends. That wisdom is ancient. We're just remembering it. And when you understand positivity this way, reparenting begins to make sense. Not as rescuing, not as control, but as rebuilding safety where it was never given. This particular poor choice is just a moment in your life, does not define your entire existence. Although society may try and pin that label on you, define yourself and how you will interact within this world. Addiction often fragments development. Recovery isn't about willpower. It's about rebuilding capacity. Reparenting isn't rescuing. It's offering what development interrupted: safety, consistency, truth. That's why positivity as a personality fails. But positivity as a practice works. Authentic positivity says, I see what is. I won't abandon you, and I won't help you disappear. It understands that progress is nonlinear, that regulation comes before reasoning, that love must be paired with limits. This is hope in motion. Here's something grief has taught me again and again. Love doesn't end when life does. It changes form. It changes texture. But it doesn't disappear. Grief is not the opposite of love. It's love with nowhere to go. And when we honor grief without rushing it, without silencing it, we keep love alive in a way that doesn't harm us. You're allowed to miss. You're allowed to remember. You're allowed to smile and ache at the same time. Holding joy alongside sorrow doesn't betray what you lost. It honors it. If you're loving someone through loss and addiction, this is for you. Your nervous system matters. Try this simple orienting practice. Look around and name 5 neutral objects. Press your feet into the floor. Lengthen your exhale. Regulation is not selfish. It is contagious. As I remind readers, you can't regulate someone you are abandoning yourself for. Positivity without regulation becomes pressure. Positivity with regulation becomes safety. So what does it actually mean to walk with grief? Let me tell you. It means letting grief have seasons, allowing joy without guilt, resting when the body asks, speaking names when they arise, setting boundaries around your energy. It means understanding that healing doesn't erase grief. No, it changes your relationship to it. You don't carry grief forever in the same way, but you don't leave it behind you either. You learn how to walk together. Do I need to say that for you again? You learn how to walk together, you and grief, side by side, symbiotic. I want to offer you a few gentle reflections. You don't need to answer them today. Just let them rest with you. Maybe journal them later. What have I been grieving quietly? Where have I rushed myself because I thought I should be better by now? What does my grief need from me today? Not forever. just today. What if my grief isn't a setback, but a sacred companion? And maybe the most important question, what if honoring grief is one of the most loving things I'll ever do? If you're listening today and you're tired, if you're loving someone and wondering if you're doing it wrong, hear this. You don't need to be positive. You need to be steady. Authentic positivity isn't optimism, it's presence. It's choosing love that tells the truth, that sets limits, love that stays. And if no one has told you this yet, you're not weak for staying. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You're not hopeless for feeling exhausted. Hope doesn't ask you to save anyone. It asks you to stay oriented towards life, including your own. You're not alone. Until next time, this is Sharon Lee, bringing you clarity to chaos through hope. Thank you for trusting this space with something so tender. If today stirred emotions, memory, or heaviness, be gentle with your afternoon. Grief asks for patience, not productivity. Next time on HOPECast, we'll talk about burnout and why exhaustion is often grief that never got permission to rest. Until then, remember this. You're not behind, you're not weak, you're not broken. You're grieving because you loved, and that has always been worth it. Hope isn't about leaving grief behind. It's about learning how to walk forward together. Sometimes all you have left is hope, and sometimes hope is enough. Talk soon.